Hello all and welcome to the last of our Understanding Diversity and Difference online lectures and last ever lecture. And today's topic is inclusive education or teaching for social justice. So I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land upon which the university stands, and to respectfully recognise elders both past and present. This lecture is going to outline some of the hopes for educational inclusion and teaching for social justice, and also to examine some of the barriers to this, what might stop this from happening. I'm also going to review the course. Okay. Inclusion and social justice are intertwined, and to understand them as educators, we need to understand the social, historical and political context within which we live and work. And this means having a broad view of the world in which we live and understanding our place in it, because education is vital to the world, politically, economically, and more broadly for the well-being of people. Ideas can free us, and thought can liberate us. And I firmly believe, inspired by educational thinkers like Freire, John Dewey, Michel Foucault and Henry Giroux, my view is that education should be political, and that some of the best forms of activism happen within educational spaces. Such an idea argues that change comes not from conflict, but through understanding. This is a quote from Paulo Freire, who you should remember from Ed Theories last year. And he says that sooner or later, being less human leads the oppressed to struggle against those who made them so. In order for this struggle to have meaning, the oppressed must not, in seeking to regain their humanity, become in turn oppressors of the oppressors, but rather restorers of the humanity of both. So this is social justice. This idea that the struggle for social justice is the struggle for understanding, and the struggle to eliminate some of those social divisions that make some people more equal than others. So Freire was writing in the 70s in Brazil. We might think that this is a long time ago in a place far, far away. But education is still denied to 58 million children around the world. I'll say that number again. Education is denied to 58 million children around the world. And poverty is one of the biggest barriers to education. Also, governments in some parts of the world actively deny education to some of its citizens. So I'm sure you all know about Malala Yousafzai, who was a Pakistani schoolgirl who a few years ago, she's an educational activist. The Taliban prevented girls from going to school. She went anyway, and she was shot in the head and taken to England to be treated. And she's become, recently she won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's become a voice for girls around the world. This quote up, but the usual technical troubles prevented me from doing so, so I'll just read it to you. So Malala says, if you hit a talib with your shoe, then there would be no difference between you and the talib. You must not treat others with cruelty, and that much harshly. You must fight others, but through peace and through dialogue and through education. So if we think back to Freire's quote about the oppressed not becoming the oppressors of the oppressor, but rather the oppressed becoming the restorers of humanity, we can see that his ideas are still alive today in what Malala Yousafzai has to say about education, that it's important we do not become the oppressors of those people who we see as oppressing us. And even within our own Western social context, educational inequalities remain. And what can we do to change this? So over the past weeks, we've examined some of the dominant ideas within contemporary Australian society and seen how the education system privileges some groups and places others at a disadvantage. One of the key features of contemporary social life is that groups of people are set up into binaries or pairs that are unequal. So male, female, white, black, straight, gay, able-bodied, disabled. And we've looked over the past weeks at how processes of othering create an invisible norm through dominant understandings of the visible, spoken for and deficient other. And we've also looked at how people are othered through discourse. And a really important writer who Eileen Morton Robinson refers to is Michel Foucault. And Foucault wrote a very important book in 1975 called Discipline and Punish: The Birth of the Prison. And in this book, Foucault argues that society uses surveillance to keep going particular power relationships. And in order to illustrate this, he uses the idea of the panopticon, which was a prison designed by a British architect and philosopher called Jeremy Bentham. And here you can see a picture of a panopticon. So it's a circular prison building made of individual cells with a tower at the centre. Each cell has 2 windows, one to let in light that cannot be seen out of, and another facing the central tower. The guard, if there is one, and that's an important point, if there is one, can see and easily identify every prisoner in their cell, but the prisoner cannot see the guard and actually does not know if there is a guard in the tower at all. And what Foucault says, and the point of the panopticon, was that prisoners start to regulate their own behaviour accordingly. And Foucault says, all that is needed is to place a supervisor in a central tower and to shut up in each cell a madman, a patient, a condemned man, a worker or a schoolboy. By the effect of backlighting, one can observe from the tower, standing out precisely against the light, the small captive shadows in the cells of the periphery. They are like so many cages, so many small theatres, in which each actor is alone, perfectly individualised and constantly visible. The panoptic mechanism arranges spatial unities that make it possible to see constantly and to recognise immediately. Visibility is a trap. So for Foucault, the metaphor of the panopticon as a mechanism for surveillance is a powerful one. And what he says is that these social institutions like the factory, the school, the prison, the asylum reinforce and reproduce these ideas of normality and abnormality. And these constant divisions between normal and abnormal, coupled with the idea that the abnormal is in need of correction, measurement or supervision, facilitates the surveillance of one group by another. And it also encourages self-surveillance, so we regulate our own behaviour. Like the prisoners in the panopticon, we are aware of the threat of the guard, the watcher, and so we behave accordingly, policing our own behaviour as well as the behaviour of others. And this idea of surveillance and regulating our own behaviour, because we never know when we're being watched, ties to the second lecture of the course, when we looked at neoliberal governance and the idea of regulated freedom, that we are relatively free, we have freedom of speech, movement and association, but at the same time government has us under surveillance through security cameras, traffic cameras, and through laws which govern the way we should behave within our public and private lives. So we we've also seen how Indigenous Australians have been under constant surveillance by the majority, the Northern Territory intervention being a case in point. We have also seen how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students continue to be excluded from an education system that not only privileges white European ways of knowing, learning and teaching, but also that actively reproduces the notion of the Aboriginal other. Remember that government institutions are not trusted by Indigenous Australians because school was one of the places from which children would be taken from families. Also, Indigenous students may be positioned by teachers as pathologically absent, good at sports, or incapable of understanding the basics of numeracy and literacy. But educational exclusion does not only apply to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. Okay, so sorry. Hopefully this is all still hanging together. I've just done something to my app that I'm not sure what I've done. But educational exclusion does not only apply to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but also to people of low socio-economic status whose choices are restricted by location, school quality and intergenerational poverty. Also, students with disabilities are excluded educationally. And in the 19th century, a branch of science known as eugenics, which was based upon Darwinism, survival of the fittest, categorised many people, including children, as subnormal. And this was often based along racial lines and used to justify the subordination of one race by another. For example, the British would measure the heads of Indigenous Australians in order to demonstrate the scientific fact, in inverted commas, that Indigenous people had smaller brain cavities and therefore were inferior. In countries that followed eugenic science, ungraded classes were created for children who were labelled as retarded or slow or feeble-minded, children who we might today understand as autistic, Asperger's or ADHD. And I'm not trying to argue that special education is based on eugenics, but rather to illustrate how we continue to label and categorise children and adults as different or deficient or special, and to encourage you to think about what that means in terms of your own teaching practice, as well as the wider social implications of this. Also, I want you to think about the way in which students who are placed into special education become forever understood to be fundamentally different from non-special students. So it's disability that makes them special, and the way in which we as a society understand that makes them other. And Beth Ferry, who's a disability studies scholar, argues that disability labels function as a discursively produced system of social othering that creates social divisions between students who are considered normal and regular and those who are seen as deficient and disordered. So what she's arguing here is that individual students are labelled with individual problems that make them the object of remediation, deficiency and othering. They are understood by what they can't do. And this gives the disabled student very little control over to what happens to them within educational settings. So, and let's think about inclusion, which is high on the agenda for educational education. So remembering the week 2 reading when we looked at the Melbourne Declaration, the first goal of which says the following, and I'll let you read that. And I wonder if you think whether the goals of the Melbourne Declaration are being met. Are they possible? Is it possible to meet them? An inclusive education may seem like an uphill battle, and we might look at our curriculum documents and NAPLAN aims for social justice, but we won't find them. And this is because social justice is not necessarily something that you teach, but it can inform your approach to teaching. It's in the relationship that you have with your students, the ways in which you assess their work. It's the texts you choose for your classroom, or how you physically set up your classroom. And it's in this way that we can alter what Deborah Udell calls the chain of meaning within our classrooms, and begin to interrupt the dominant discourses that shape our workplaces of teachers. And this course has aimed to alter our chain of meaning and to challenge your understandings about diversity and difference. We've focused specifically on the National Curriculum Cross-Curriculum Priority 1 and the AITSL standards relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. And we've viewed Australian history from the perspectives of first Australians, and we've heard firsthand about the impact and ongoing legacy of colonisation. We've also looked at discourse and the idea that the social world does not evolve naturally, but it is reproduced by all of us all the time through language, cultural values, and symbolically through the way in which groups of people are represented. I would like to thank you for listening. Thank you for attending classes. It's been a great year, possibly the best year of diversity and difference, and to wish you all the best in your future degree programme. Thanks a lot. Bye.